And I think just before we jump into kind of our bioregional updates, I wanted to bring up just some things that I wanted to ask the group about. So it is summertime. Obviously, we have a bit of a smaller group today than we typically do. It might be because of Juneteenth, but I also know that typically attendance tends to fall off during the summer months. And just reflecting on our meeting last week, I noticed that. So I think when we started the mapping calls, there was an idea of moving forward with certain kinds of mapping and trying to develop that more. But I also sense that last week, which kind of conflicted with that. Not conflicted, but Kim, you brought like an awesome speaker, and it would have been. I think that basically, I get the sense that it would be wonderful if we also had an area that's more open discussion type, because I feel like sometimes this general meeting can be very focused. It's very not very structured, but it goes from one region to the next, and we kind of have that flow. But I did get the sense that, especially when Thomas was on, that it would have been really nice to have more of what Benji holds, campfires, where it's you come, you arrive, there's not really any sort of specific topic, but the people who arrive come and they are able to dive into a topic of discussion that's most meaningful to all the participants coming. And I think that if we wanted to do something like that, we could look to shift the mapping call, which I think that as we're moving forward, Brandon Letzinger, who runs the Bioregional Atlas and the Department of Bioregions in Cascadia, has invited us to me and Elliot and anybody else who wants to be part of it to do a presentation on some of the maps that we're working on in about a month. We also want to get some maps completed for the group that I volunteer with. So we do have some deadlines that I would like to start having a more focused session on, where it's more task oriented. So I'm trying to think about the best way to support like these open discussions while also having that time that's truly a working meeting. And I was thinking that maybe instead of having the mapping meeting on Monday alternating with this week, the alternate weeks could just be kind of an open forum where if you come, we'll just kind of explore the topics that are of interest. If you have somebody you want to invite, they can come and you can just explore that bioregionalism topic and whatever's meaningful to us, and still continue to share resources, but more in an informal format. And then moving the mapping call to probably more of like a 1 hour meeting at some point else during the week. So I wanted to kind of get some feedback to see if that would be of interest to people, or if they think that they would, we want to keep the mapping call where it is. Yeah, so I figured we could just do a round, and because I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about that. And then we could kind of take get consensus on what we want to do moving forward. I know there's only 3 of us, but Jonathan, would you want to give your thoughts?
Sure. Here's my thought. Well, first of all, with regard to the timing of everything, this time each week does actually work for me. Currently, although I am itching to get outside because there's more watering to be done. So I can understand the summer months. There's a lot more incentive to or disincentive to use Zoom. My interest in the mapping is not, as direct as other people's, because we're not working on a particular map. And I find the technology is way beyond what I am hoping to master. The learning curve for GIS and stuff like that just seems to me too steep for someone who's all over the place the way that I am. And but I'm intrigued by what people are doing, but I might not be a regular working group member. So that's my thought about that. We have a similar kind of very small group on Tuesdays every other week, and it's the fact that it's every other week. It might be better to do it sort of once a month if we can get more folks and do more promotion, as opposed to every other week and it's the same, 3 people, maybe sometimes 4. But usually the fourth person kind of falls off after a meeting or two, and it's just the 3 of us, Victoria, myself, and Margot from the Frog House. So we'll see after Thursday if we can recruit some more people for our project. That might make a difference. Um, and, uh, and it's never a perfect time. But so that's my input for what it's worth. Kimberly?
Yeah, I'm open to whatever, whatever the group wants to do. I think it would be nice if it were twice a month or once a month, where there were maybe a regular same link for everyone that's in the bioregion, in the whole Great Lakes bioregion, to just gather. And it could be updates. It could also be just dialoguing, as you mentioned, or a combination of both. That kind of dialoguing is the kind that it's been the inquiry that I've been in for about 3 years. It's that type of thing, and I think you can really get to sometimes the collective intelligence, and something new emerges in conversation. um, one of the weeks that you were out, Anna, there was a good conversation, and it was Jonathan was there, and maybe folks from Ann Arbor, but it just seemed it was kind of one of those, because there wasn't any agenda. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm always for that, and a more spacious type of gathering, and then I would feel comfortable bringing people in, if they're in this bioregion, or if there are it's like um there are all kinds of people who've been doing this for a long time, when it was like nothing worse than an idea whose time has not come. Like, no one hears you, or you're doing this work, right? And now I keep hearing, and Jonathan talked about, this is an idea whose time has come. So I like being able to show people maybe what their work in the past has led to now, and a lot of people are surprised at what's going on right now. Because if you're keeping to yourself, you're living one with the land, and all that's around you, and you stopped watching the news, which we all should from time to time. It's just a surprise at the beautiful things happening now. So
Mhm.
a way to nurture that, cultivate that. I would love to be a part of that.
Okay. So, and you mentioned, because I think that the other reality that I'm running into is I'm starting to find that I am being stretched a little thin between trying to do some of these mapping things as well as hold this space. So I'm almost wondering if we move back to bi-weekly, and maybe one of those meetings is more of an updates call, and then the other meeting with that month, and it'll be the same link, can be more of that open discussion forum. Um, and then for the mapping, I'm trying to see if we can like shorten it, and also just make it a bit more concrete exactly what we're doing. And that's why I was thinking maybe changing the time would make it easier, because that was ultimately why this link for this week is supposed to be different, because this is supposed to be a different meeting, but it gets kind of confusing when it's the same time. So one of the I'm kind of looking at my availability and Elliot's availability. 'Cause he's so involved, and then I'll send out like a form to see if people are open to maybe moving it to in the morning time, just half hour to an hour once a week to see if we could check in and kind of do more task oriented things. Okay.
That looks good. That sounds good, Anna.
Okay, great. Cool. So that is kind of the only thing that I wanted to really talk about today in terms of group wide like decision making for how we're going to move forward. I do have some mapping updates, which I think will be that's how once we kind of differentiate the mapping group, we can still provide, you know, monthly updates probably in the calls that we have. But and so I think otherwise we can just kind of go around. I'll just do a quick update on where we're at with mapping, and then we can do our bioregional updates. So Elliot and I kind of showed you what we were working on last week, and not much has changed between now and last week, but we have been meeting with Brendan Letzinger, who is from the Department of Bioregions in Cascadia. He has asked us to do a presentation in August on some of the stuff that we've been putting together as like a lunch talk so that we can talk with other people that are also doing bioregional mapping and just kind of provide a presentation of what we're working on. And then he's also offered to help set up like a small website to be able to show provide, instead of having a if you wanted to share this information with somebody, instead of sharing the Mighty Networks link, it would be an actual website with a domain that would have links to our different meetings. It would have an event calendar. But it could also have like a splash page where it actually gives information about our bioregion and some of the things that we do. And also a resource page where it's easier to move through rather than going through Mighty Networks or our Google Drive. So we are probably going to be moving forward with something like that, which I'm very excited about, and I think will make it a lot easier for us to be able to share some of our information. And Jonathan, I know like your website's so good to have for inviting people in. So you can also share with them the Great Lakes, but we can also put a link into actual like the possible Rochester page too. So yeah, so that's that update. Jonathan, would you like to give us some updates on Rochester and what we're to expect at the meeting this week? Oh, you're muted.
I would say that we're kind of backing into creating this bioregional learning center. It's been an interesting process. There was this huge burst of activity and interest when Joe and Penny came to Rochester. But we really haven't seen too much of any of those folks since then. So we're hoping that we'll get people out on Thursday for our first in-person event. And we have two things happening. One is a conversation about creating this bioregional learning center where, I'm going to say a few words about the property that we, think we can develop into this, and which has all kinds of potential. And then there's going to be a presentation by Dan Antonioli, who's another kind of transplant climate refugee from California and the wildfires, who is a really interesting character. He has a building company. He's done some real estate development. He's developed an eco village out in California. And he's going to be talking about Sustainable Finger Lakes, which was an organization that used to be Sustainable Tompkins County and then changed its name just recently and has a map of all kinds of resources in the Finger Lakes region of people who signed up as sustainable nodes in the community. So that's happening on Thursday, and then little by little, the ideas for the Bioregional Learning Center are coming together. And we really want to keep it very open-ended because it's, it is really a work in progress, or, an embryo in, um, in the process of being birthed. And that's where we are right now. So I think that's my update on the bioregion, the bioregional activities.
Great, thank you. And so how was the Haudenosaunee social on last
Oh
week?
yeah,
Yeah.
that was very interesting. First of all, it was we arrived and there was this huge dining area, and it was mostly empty. And we wondered if people were going to show up, and then all of a sudden, a conference. It turned out there was a conference going on at the same time, sponsored by the Nature Conservancy, I think. And the conference let out, and all of a sudden, the dining room was filled to the rafters with people from all over the world, in fact, not just um, Native Americans, but Native Ugandans and people from different countries. Um, and I didn't really see anything specific from the organizers, from the department at the University at Buffalo, the sort of Indigenous Studies department. But we got to sit and talk with people at the dining table. And most of the food was actually quite great. So it was very appetizing. And we met one young um, guy who was from the Blackfeet tribe, and he talked about the fact that their work and his work for the Nature Conservancy is restoring the buffalo. So they're, busy repopulating some of the prairie areas, and there was some interesting things being discussed. It was also interesting learning that for many of the people there, uh, they're learning about indigenous culture and language pretty much in the same way that we are, because they have been, their family um, history, it was one of being completely uprooted, sent off. In one case, the grandfather had gone to one of these boarding schools. And so his children, didn't speak any of the native languages, and their children, which is the current generation, are just learning them and just learning the culture and reconstructing it, and learning from people that they can find who still know the old traditions, because they were, their culture was completely uprooted. Um, so that was one of the more interesting takeaways. And then the dance was, I guess, not what I expected, but it kind of more of what they call a shuffle, where they dance in a circle. People just kind of basically walk around in a circle, um, and to the beat of the drum, and to a little bit of chanting, but mostly just and uh, some people have a little bit of interesting footwork, but mostly it's just you know moving forward in a line around a circle or in a series of lines. because you can get into concentric stuff. And with some hauling, of course, which we did not understand the significance of. But so that was the event.
Yeah, they've actually so they started hosting more of these socials, and I think that it's wonderful. Oh, it's NACS, it's NACS, and I can't remember what it stands for. But they've started doing these free dinners and free social dances. And typically there is a speaker associated with it. I could not find much information about this one. So that's too bad that you missed the conference, because I'm sure that that would have been really great too. That was one thing that I was wondering, is when the Nature Conservancy and whether the Department of Indigenous Studies was going to do a presentation of some sort during that. But yeah, I've been to a couple now, and it's a great, I think that it's just a great way for them to get their own communities together. It's but I also think that it's a great way to invite. They're very open, and they are very open to anybody joining, and anybody joining the dance circles. And at the event that I was at this past weekend, it was more of a formal dance, where they had an actual competition of members of all 6 of the Haudenosaunee nations coming and doing that's called the shadow dance, where it's more of the as an individual, you're dancing, and the point is to get your feet have to go as fast as possible when you're moving around. And it's quite interesting. So I'm glad that you guys are able to see it, because I've enjoyed going to each one that I've been to. Okay. So Kim, do you want to give any updates?
Yeah, and I'm
Maybe
just
similar to what you did.
what's that?
I said it can even be similar to what you did before we started recording too.
Oh, okay. Well, what I'm wondering now, I'm wondering if there are proceedings available from the gathering that took place in Buffalo over the 3 days. Bringing the scientists and the indigenous elders together, and because I know Curtis is posting a lot, like follow-up things on LinkedIn, just his own observations. But maybe I'll check to see if there is some type of reporting or insights that came out of it that we could share then with the Great Lakes bioregion, especially since it took place in our bioregion. So
Yeah, I will also look into that. And I think it would be great if we could make some sort of connection, because I think that's very much in line with what we want to focus on too. So
yeah,
yeah.
I consider us all the same.
Mhm.
It would be like I'm sure they would want learnings like disseminated throughout,
Mhm.
the region.
Yeah, so I'll definitely look into the Department of Indigenous Studies at UB, because they're very involved in the social dances that they've been putting on. So yeah, and please let us know if you find anything too.
Yeah, I'll just check. I'll ask. Curtis was someone that I met through Ben Roberts somewhat recently. He's involved in a lot of different things, and it just so happened that he wrote about going back to Buffalo, where he was from. So that's one thing. I've come across, just like in the past week or so, interesting communications, ways of communicating. Um, uh, One, I ran into a person and I just met. I've been wanting to get a hold of her. She has a podcast called Eco Speaks Cleveland, and it's how I've been trying to get up to speed on all the different sustainability things going on in Cleveland. Like I mentioned before, there's so much. And I'm curious about, like, as we develop a bioregional sensibility, like how can that kind of breathe and stretch out? And, what's the role of Cleveland, all of this stuff, which is more than just Cleveland. Every place around Cleveland, we just call Cleveland. But how does it stretch out to this, maybe the shore of the southern shore of Lake Erie, and even keeping going. So I'm curious about that. I met her going to a group for the first time in person, this conscious capitalism group. And, not for the capitalism, but I'm involved in some different regenerative economics studying right now. And this is a group that Dave Nash, who's in the design school and part of the Cleveland local team, has been engaged with. And, he's led like a sustainability roundtable for business for 20 years and conscious stuff too. So anyways, the person who was going to speak there wasn't able to make it. So someone else went, and Jonathan, you'll appreciate this. They did a constellation. And they said, does anyone here know what constellations are? And there was, I only know from, our bioregional constellations that Annalika has held.
Yeah.
So anyways, it was good. And it was all very human. Like what was being mapped was all kinds of like human things, which of course it would be if you're not, that's like normal. And they remembered, someone remembered that the community wasn't mapped, right? So the community, someone had to go represent the community, and it was an opportunity to ask, well, what does community, how is it defined? Is it humans or a more than human world with this? And so it was a way of bringing on what we usually map, which is the land, right, and the water and all this type of thing. So I thought that was kind of cool. What else? I just became part of a group called Living Cities Earth, which is a global kind of like link tank, they say, and a vision to like bring, I don't know how many cities, to like millions of cities and people to life. And there's a communications company that also joined when I did, called Bloom, and it's here in the US, and it is about it's creating a network of regenerative projects. So, and I know some of the things that we do here in the bioregion would kind of fit in there. So maybe there's a potential, well, I'm sure there is a potential connection with this Bloom group. Let's see. Oh, and there's two sprints, like funding sprints, regenerative, co-creating regenerative funding ecosystems, and they're coming, some are coming to a close. And that's interesting. And I thought that I would probably, I wanted to learn more about regenerative economics in that, but it's really not, it's different. It's more, it's different than that. So I'm part of a cohort now with the Ecozoic Institute in North Carolina on regenerative economics based on the teachings of Thomas Berry. And I didn't realize when joining it halfway through that I have to come up with a study plan and do a presentation. So I'm kind of focused on that right now, and I'm kind of looking at food systems, and I would love to map our farms, in Northeast Ohio, and where these big box stores that we've talked about that before, this as something related to climate, changing the food systems with big box stores is something that could have good impact. So we'll see what happens there. But that could relate to mapping here of some type.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I was actually there's another member from the design school. Her name is Gwen, and she lives out in Colorado, but she is part of our, like, the design schools, I guess the design lab that is going to be focusing on bioregional mapping. And that's what she's most interested in, is food systems. And she's going to be holding a presentation for design school members on food systems, and I don't know if she's going to be including the mapping process, but she is working on basically she's most interested in trying to find what would be needed if the food system collapsed in your area. What are the resources that are available, and what would you have to do to instigate more bioregional and local food systems. So that as we learn from each other, I think that that's definitely something that I can bring here. And also, if you're interested in joining the design school at the community level, for like the $5 level, you'd be able to.
I saw that. I did,
Yeah.
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I think so. I was going to do it, and then, just I know that we all need to have like a funding source of things, and I don't know. There's something in me that I don't know, that feels a little bit closed to me. Like, you can do this, this, and this, and not this. And I think when possibly might be in one of these funding sprints, if
Oh,
if
very
she
likely.
also is like talking about, dialoguing and having, a nice way to be, you know, introducing the concept of conversations in places, the conversations that need to happen. If this is the same when.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the design school, so I think it probably is.
Yeah.
Um,
Gwen Garcelon, it very well might be, but I think that you um would probably find her very interesting. I can always link you to via email.
yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Hmm.
So anyway, so I am definitely, I probably will do it. I know there's so much information, and I do want to, so I do support everything that's being done here. So yeah,
Yes.
I'll do it.
Not to make you feel pressured or anything, but that was just one thing that as soon as you started talking about that, I'm like, we are going to be talking about that soon in the design school. But
Yeah,
yeah.
and the way like framing here, I just feel like, okay, so because I already know that we've got more than 15,000 farms, and if we needed to switch right now, like is there enough land that could provide food for people who live in this area? And
Mhm.
the answer was no, just mainly because, 86% of the what's being grown is for to feed animals for human consumption, and then ethanol, and then a little bit, for, human beings. But there's such I'm also coming in contact with like farms that are doing it's like they're doing even like more than farming and more than just traditionally educating people. It's becoming, a place of community, right? And if we could just nurture that, help that develop with existing infrastructure that's not based on what happens when everything collapses. Because I can't. I'm way just more hopeful and thinking that we need things to pull people in,
Mhm.
with hope. So that's what I hope happens here. I don't know if I have a role in that, but it would be nice.
I think that we're all hopeful that it won't come down to that. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I was part of I am still part of a nonprofit that focuses on community and large scale solar projects, and essentially supporting communities as they're trying to look to see like is hosting a larger solar project viable for them. And so many rural communities feel very threatened, and quite frankly there's plenty of developers that take advantage of communities, especially communities that can't afford to have the resources to ensure that they're advocating for themselves. But that's what we focus on. And one of the big things that everybody's so worried about farmland being taken away by these solar projects, but realistically it's exactly what you said. The amount of farmland that's meant for even ethanol alone, it's not much farmland is actually dedicated to feeding the people who live in the region. And if you started to replace farmland with other sources of more renewable energy, or I'm sorry, started to replace ethanol with sources of renewable energy like wind and solar, you'd actually be opening up more farmland, because the amount of ethanol it takes to power a vehicle is the amount of acres that you need of corn to make ethanol to power a vehicle is far less than it would be for a solar project or a wind farm. So even taking all of those things into consideration, I think are really critical. Like, relying on all these like biodiesel fuel is also not it's not sustainable in the long run. So
Yeah, I mean, I would like it to get to the point where there's like some kind of like group or infrastructure here to pull in. There are all kinds of people, that have been working on this. For example, one of our like distinguished physicists, who's an emeritus now, he and his wife have been leaders in the wind energy for decades, and they can tell you everything there is to know about our General Assembly. I mean, which is so many things have been stopped, by um, our state government, which is really backward. So just this whole bioregional where you're going, it's just different. It's different, right? So what kind of knowledge does someone like, this professor have, and his wife, who could maybe just share with their bioregion? There's, I don't know, I can't explain it. Does that make any sense? Like, this.
well, I think that in New York, it's kind of the opposite for us, where the local or the state government is actually taking away community rights in terms of vetoing or going forward with renewable energy projects, because New York State is so gung ho on hitting those carbon emission targets, that it's actually turning a lot of people against it. Whereas if we focused more on bioregionalism and gave voices to communities and ensured that proper community engagement was occurring between any developers coming into the community, like when that happens, it benefits the communities, and they tend to have more uh, quicker projects going through. They have more local employers or local workforces instead of bringing people in from out of town, and it's a more sustainable project overall. It's more time consuming in terms of like the setup and the community engagement, but overall, like, it'll make people happier with the developments that are occurring rather than having this top down approach. And it just pisses everybody off because they're like, I don't want the democratic government coming in and telling me what I can and can't do with my property, or what's happening to my town. They don't know what's going on here. So I think that it is very relevant in multiple ways.
Yeah, and having the conversation that's not about the state, not
Yeah.
about the states, right? It's about what is community in the bioregion, and expanding community to be beyond human, like taking, the water, the
Mhm.
land. I mean, so I don't know, like the land, what goes onto it, but we should be doing things with the land to regenerate. What can we as good humaning do? Because we need fertile soil, right?
Yeah.
So and it would be interesting to have conversations where, people will be coming in with their understandings of how states work, and there will be insights that would come from just looking at this differently, looking at where we are and our place differently than we've been conditioned to for like me, my whole life, right?
Mhm.
So it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
It is for sure. Yeah.
What do you think, Jonathan? Because we
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all happening. Um, I don't really have a lot to add to what you're just saying. Um, just continuing to push forward with all this stuff. and see if we can get people to really think differently. You know, bioregionalism is a way to look at the world that's different from other ways of looking at it. And um, you know, it's a matter of trying to shift people's perspective and what they're paying attention to, because mostly what they're, you know, what we're all being kind of brainwashed to, uh, you know, think about and live in is this thing that we call modernity. And you know, for people to be able to shift their perspective such that they actually see the world differently and notice different things about it. I was just, you know, digging up some of this information on how much lawn there is in the U.S. There is more lawn is a bigger irrigated crop than, you know, the top four things after it all combined: corn and soybeans and, you know, all that. 40 million acres of lawn, which is really an invasive. I mean, first of all, it's all irrigated. So talk about the amount of water that's wasted, and, you know, things like that. So the question is, can we get enough people beginning to think this way that we can actually restore some of the vitality of the soil all around us and restore our bioregions that way? But, you know, I just, you know, for the work that we're doing here in Rochester, we're a long way from understanding even how many farms we have in the region and what you know, how many of them are using cover crops and how many are just, you know, leaving the soil exposed, you know, 6 months of the year and stuff like that. So that's all still things that we need to learn about.
Yeah, we had there was a researcher just in Northeast Ohio that just took on that research because he was curious about the farms here with that question. And then he gave
Be
it, there's
interesting to know how you went about it. I mean, do you have a sense of how that was all done?
I can find out. I can find out.
That would
I know
be,
it's with data. I know it's with,
yeah.
it was all data.
Mhm.
And he publicized it. So I'll get that. And
Well,
then he
where
worked,
to get that?
there's a little Cleveland Seeds group, you know, kind of like a little permaculture group, and they bring in different scientific talks, and that's it's a really cool, we have a cool culture here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're definitely not as far along as like the Pacific Northwest in certain things, but I do feel like there is a lot that happens, especially in, you know, it across all of the Great Lakes that most people don't really know. So I think bioregionalism, it seems to me like it was a lot bigger around here than I think we all originally thought. Those people are still around. They're still might not be as active as they once were, but yeah, it is pretty cool.
I noticed something that's different for me with just the news and the coverage, and it's like it gets me irritated now, and I know it shouldn't, but you know, the news we see on the Canadian fires, the Canadian, you know, and it's only like, what's the smoke going to do to me? And it's like, it's so different when we are in conversation and, you know, conscious relationship with people all around as a bioregion. And it's like the northern part of the Great Lakes bioregion is having fires right now, right? Like, so this artificial boundary of a country just it reflects everything, the reporting even, and it's just like get more conversations with, you know, bioregional conversations, and that shifts, that will help shift thinking. And of course, when there are people, you know, in our group, like getting like maybe impatient at philosophizing, because it's like, come on, I gotta do something. Or in these other funding groups, these regenerative funding sprints, you know, there are people there in Africa, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like, yeah, it's great to have these conversations, but we need the funding now. So, and that is another way, I think, also of learning and growing, and to foster those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It is, it's interesting because I was actually talking to someone who's outside of the US, and outside of the US and Canada. They're in Switzerland, and they were asking me about the fires, and they're like, you know, what's interesting is that you didn't hear about it until New York City got all the smoke. You didn't hear about it like really in Canada very much, because it is just kind of like even though Canada is right there and is very much connected to everything that's happening in the US, you only hear about it when it happens in the United States too, which I think is sad. Instead of like, oh, it's also around the world's largest source of fresh water. Yeah.
What you say reminds me though of another really cool podcast in Canada. I think it's in British Columbia, and it's for destination marketers, like for, you know, people wanting people to come to their towns or regions, and they are their take on it is, I think it's the name of the town or the mountain in 50 years. So it's like, say, oh, I wish I remembered, but say Vancouver 2050 or something. And it's just the conversations they have. It's like, so what are we, so we're there at that time. What do we need to be doing now? Because, you know, how are people going to come here? And then the talks are, well, gosh, if, you know, if every summer's a fire summer, we may have to shift and try, you know, people coming in, you know, a different part of the season, and or and bringing in people with different theories or experts on climate about like what can be done now, you know, and ruggedizing, you know, the places where we are. So kind of like in some of the same ways I think I might hear here, right, about how do we do this if when things collapse? It's not, it's a different conversation, it's a different style. And also, an observation I have is people who are seem to be very centered, and again with that human and more than human world, you know, talks about collapse have a totally different quality and texture when it's, you know, being in the company of people like this. It's very calm. It's very, what are we going, you know, we need to look at right now, look at the Bear Valley or the Bow Valley, and we need to do this. Like some guy said, our church is doing this, and you know, there may be other organizations where we live that are interested in a cooperative conversation about this, because you know, we can wake up and things can be very different. So what are we doing? And then it gets people into that caring mode, like more of an open-hearted mode to, okay, let's see what we can do, because now is different than 20 years ago is what these same people are saying, and they've been looking at this for a long time. And those conversations are easy to be in. I think it's sensing like nervousness that just, I think, makes it at least difficult for me, and probably others.
Yeah. And I get the sense that a lot of it is because so many people have accepted it so long ago that it's going to happen. So now it's like, not nervous about it. We know that it's going to happen. We got to start planning versus like, yeah.
Or I wouldn't even say not that it's going to happen, because anything can change. I mean, it's not, and it's not being part of any self-fulfilling prophecy, but I mean, the facts are, I mean, you can see what is happening, that change is upon us. It is now, and it's visible. So what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Because we need to, like, people, but we do need to all start moving. And I'm the worst, let me tell you, because my knowing doing gap is so wide right now. I feel like I'm watching people plant gardens, like, oh, no
Yeah,
garden.
Jonathan over here.
Oh, I know, and it's wonderful.
Mhm.
And I want to know, how do you stop the animals from eating all of your food or all of the plants?
Well, in our case, there are actually, because we live in a suburban neighborhood, there are fences around. Our neighbors have a fence because they have a dog, and they're trying to keep the dog off of other people's property. And so the first year, I think we had a couple of deer come by and eat a couple of things, but this year we haven't seen any deer, and I don't expect any. Um, this is a pretty densely populated area. And I have a personal contract with the rabbits in our property. And we met early on and agreed that everything outside of the fenced area is fair game for them, but I don't want them inside our vegetable garden. And so far that's been a pretty happy arrangement. The only thing that I was a little concerned about was that they kept chewing off the parsley every time I tried to grow parsley in the herb garden, and that's not fenced. But the parsley seems to have won out. It's exceeding their capacity to eat it. So you just make peace with the animals, I think, and allow them to have some of the food, um, and hope for the best. We do have some nets to prevent the birds from eating all the blueberries, but that's about it.
I hear this all the time. People make they make agreements with the
Yes.
animals. Is it someone that's a homestead in Indiana, and like you met Thomas in North Carolina? That's what people do. And now Jonathan.
Yes. Well, the pets, the birds and the rabbits are getting to be quite friendly and tolerant of us. Um, they are still wild, but uh, they don't seem to mind us walking around when they're out there chewing on the grass or digging up worms. We had a real wonderful experience this spring watching a pair of robins bringing up a nest full of, eggs and babies, and then watching them, develop to the point where they could take off.
They're special.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that that's
Yeah.
one downside of having a dog is we have so many rabbits and robins and birds in our neighborhood. They tend to stay clear of whenever a door opens at my house. So he'll just chase them all away.
Mhm.
Well, um,
Well,
so I know that Jonathan, you're probably itching to get out to your garden. So I think if we want to
yeah.
maybe do our closing checkouts and kind of head out a little early, that'd be good.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated getting time to spend time with both of you. And Jonathan, I hope that at one of these events that you guys have is going to be at your house again, because I really want to see that yard at some point this summer.
Yes.
um
Yeah. We're gonna start potlucks here pretty soon.
cool, cool. Yeah. Well, and I'll pass it on to you, Jonathan.
Oh, yes. Well, not much to say except that it's beautiful out there, and so we just need to make sure that all the plants have enough water and don't, you know, die of thirst before they get through this period, to where they can actually take root and you know, grow a little bit more robustly and begin to fill in, because you know the place has been looking pretty odd, covered in wood chips from, you know, one end to the other, when everybody else just has their regular front lawn and backyards. But we're good, and onwards and upwards. Kimberly?
Yeah, same here. It's been really nice to be able to chat all together. I feel like we could really get into some things. So thank you. When we hang up, I'm going to do my membership and join you in the design school.
Oh, very good.
Does that mean I
I'm
get to
gonna
go
do
on the
mine, and
weekends? I'm sorry?
then you get to go on what?
You have weekend sessions, right? Or no? Are those done?
Uh,
I think that the learning
well,
journey is done, but yeah.
yeah, the initial learning journey was over, but you could view all of the videos that led up to it. Some of it, some of it was quite fascinating. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
Great.
And Kimberly, I highly recommend you join the campfires on Friday if you can take your lunch break then, because I think you would really like that. Benji does a fantastic job of holding that space, and that's kind of what I'm thinking would be really nice for us, is something similar.
Yeah, so Friday, the only thing is Fridays at that time, that's when we've had a group that's been meeting for like 3 years, and we just keep meeting, and maybe if we ever change it, I would do that.
Yeah.
Um,
right.
yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, have a great week, guys, and happy summer solstice.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Yes. Yeah, see you in person on Thursday. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye.